America now faces a future where our response to disasters won't only be measured in lost property, but in lives lost. Today's guest is Mark Ghilarducci, the former head of California's Emergency Services and Homeland Security. Ghilarducci has learned that disaster response is not just about recovering today, but being prepared to handle what comes tomorrow. From Ballard Studios in West Hollywood, California, and a special episode hosted by Anthony Williams, it's 13th and Park.
You and I can differ, but that doesn't mean you and I cannot be friends.
That often is missing in politics.
We went from North Korea to M&M. That's a lot, man.
Aliens could have invaded and nothing would surprise me at this point.
It's a nightmare.
Those are the facts.
We have to solve everything.
What's in this tea?
Mark, good to see you. Welcome to 13th and Park in our Hollywood studio. It's good to have you, especially given the current situation that we face right now with the fires. And I know you are, whether formally or informally, helping us to navigate that, given all of your background and experience. We're looking at right now still, I think, several active fires in the region. What is your sense of the current assessment of what's going on, in LA?
Well, first of all, happy to be with you. Good to see you here. I would just say overall right now, the crews, the firefighters, the resources are getting a handle on the fires. I think you're seeing a big shift in the weather. Winds have started to die down. And when that happens in conditions like this, the humidity increases, the firefighters can really make tremendous progress. And so eventually they'll have control of them and we'll get back into a steady state and move on to the recovery process.
I had a chance with our host, Adam Goodman, in a conversation about the situation in the fires. Obviously how big it is, but the fact that it's in such a significant media market, a lot of attention to what's going on here in LA. So the sense of it almost seems like a larger disaster. In your experience, and you got a lot of experience in this, how does this compare to other, not just fire disasters, but natural disasters in California over your experience?
I think your assessment's correct and sort of where it's located. It's not only a very highly focused media market where, it gains a lot of attention. It is an area that drives the economy of the state and of the nation and even globally. So, there's massive amounts of industries here that are critical. And then there are many people whose homes have burned down, who've been impacted by this to work in those industries, right? So there's a lot of cascading impacts here that is a little different than what we've seen in other parts of the state with wildfire. I mean, we've always had an economic impact, but I think that's probably one of the most significant things here. And then I think the areas that have burned, it's areas of high worth. And you look at the Palisades, these homes that have been there since the building of Los Angeles. So that's been very traumatic. And we always move rapidly, but really this is really one where people want and have an expectation that we get this fire out and we get the recovery cleaned up and we start building again.
Yeah, that is the situation that we confront, right? There's the original disaster, and then what is the recovery and response after that? What are some of the things we should be thinking about coming after we finally get a handle on the fires? They're pretty much out, and we're on the road to recovery. Like, what's next after that?
It's something that everybody's working on now, and that is really to achieve economic recovery, the rebuilding, you have to get the debris cleared out, right? You have to begin with removing all of the hazardous waste, the hazardous materials, things like paints and solvents and ammunition, and something new that we hadn't really dealt with in previous fires is big battery walls and electric vehicles. They have to be handled in a different way. It's different kind of hazardous material. A lot of that has to be achieved, and then simultaneously the government's working with the homeowners to get a right of entry, to get on their property. They also want to give them an opportunity to also go on their property and kind of sift through the property and be able to see if they could find some family heirlooms or rings or something very special to them. And it is something that is really more of a marathon, not a sprint. It's going to take some time to get it done.
And even as people obviously are worried about when am I going to get back into my house, if my house is still there, or when am I going to get a chance to do that? See if I can find family heirlooms or whatever I can salvage. And given all the actual risks to human health, to go back into these areas, that's a challenge.
It is a challenge. Typically they're provided, masks and gloves and maybe a Tyvek suit, goggles to be able to go in. And, it's a need for individuals who have lost their home to find something out of there. And so it's really incumbent upon the government to help them achieve that objective. And that may be a couple of days worth of effort, or so, maybe a week. And then it gives it the opportunity to move forward. But it's a big operation and it will take some time. I think Camp Fire was about 9.5 months to clear 18,000 structures. So given there could be lots of different variables that may slow the process. Roughly probably be about the same time frame, I would think. But I can tell you the governor's worked hard to clear pathways, any impediments that could potentially slow it down. For example, looking at maybe going 24 hours so that, they can leverage lack of traffic at night, so you can move large numbers of trucks moving debris to landfills, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, you say it's going to take some time, but it's also, to that point, going to take some coordination, not just, as you mentioned, with the governor in the state of California, but you got the county of Los Angeles, you got the city of Los Angeles, and of course you have federal partners. What can we expect to see in terms of coordination between all those levels of government?
Sometimes disasters can bring out political challenges, but I've also seen disasters bring out the ability to come together. I often say that the disaster recovery is really, the Achilles heel of any disaster.
Right.
We respond pretty well. We've got a lot of resources. We're doing what we can to stop the fire, to save lives, to do that on the front end. But as we get into the recovery side of things, expectations change. And so it's very important that our political leaders come together at all levels, and then all the agencies come together in a coordinated way. And I can't understate the importance of coordination and how making sure that all the different organizations are rowing in the same direction.
Looking back over your time of dealing, again, with multiple disasters, I don't know how this fire compares to other disasters you've dealt with, but what lessons have you taken from either some of those disasters or even this one now? I mean, I know we're still in the middle of it, so the lessons are still being learned, but what can we take away from these experiences and help us prepare for the next one?
Well, I mean, it's a great question. Every event essentially has its own signature, and we have lessons learned out of every event. Mother Nature continues to outpace us in our level of preparedness. I mean, we're talking about a state that has invested a massive amount into hazard mitigation, into resource enhancements, into technology and capability to not only recognize and buy down the risk, but to respond effectively, to get out in front of it by leveraging technology and being able to figure out what kind of threats are coming at us. What is the weather going to look like? And how is that going to impact a community? And then essentially pre-positioning assets in the highest risk areas and putting out alert and warnings and maybe even pre-evacuating an area. Even with all of that being done, we were still outpaced. I mean, seeing winds like we saw typically at the peaks, now in lower level of topography, was really something. Some of the themes that tend to continually come up that we learn from is effective communications in a timely way is critical to empower the public to be part of the solution to responding to disaster. This is not just a government solution. This is a private, public, non-governmental, faith-based, it's a whole of community becoming prepared and responding. So coordination is absolutely critical. And we've seen disaster response and recovery operations fail miserably because of lack of coordination and the ability that different players are on different pages. It has no benefit to anybody that we get into infighting, political discourse, whatever, that slows that recovery process down.
And I think that's absolutely right, and always has to remain the focus. And the governor announced $2.5 billion in financial support to help the recovery effort. We expect that President Trump will be here in Southern California. That's a big number, $2.5 billion. That's just from the state. There's probably going to be hopefully more coming from the federal government. And we talked a little bit about
the debris alone is probably over $3 billion, I would think so.
So that's the question. Like, at the end of the day, what should we expect in terms of what both the state will have to contribute to the recovery, but also what we might need to get from our federal partners?
Well, I mean, the money comes from a lot of different areas, but, we were fortunate that President Biden did approve 100% federal funding for 180 days. That's helpful for what we call categories A and B. That's debris operations and protective measures. So all the response costs and the items that are necessary to extinguish the fire. But there's going to be long-term. I mean, based upon coordination, and this is where it's important to think through this strategically. What is the vision for the community into the future? How do you want to rebuild effectively? Because you want to leverage things like HUD funding, Community development block grants that are designed for post-disaster recovery. But you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. There could be another disaster that occurs or some circumstance. During 2020 to 2022, we had multiple wildfires throughout the state of California. We were dealing with the pandemic response in a huge way. And we had civil unrest that was going at the same time from one end of the state to the other.
And then we had an earthquake in Ridgecrest.
And we had an earthquake in Ridgecrest. I don't want to forget that one because that was a big one, 7 point. One, and
That's
all
right.
of that happening at the same time. And so you have to be able to be nimble, understand how do you prioritize resources, where do you want to focus your attention, what's going to get resources first, how do you, save lives and property and the environment, all at the same time being strategic and making sure we all come together. And really, when you think about all of that going on, the only way to be able to effectively do it is through strong leadership, coordination, and making sure that we're communicating very well together.
Yeah, and our partnership with the private sector, because obviously the government can't do this alone.
100%.
In terms of like prioritizing, what does that look like? I mean, obviously they're on the ground. Folks are on the ground now. You got some of the immediate stuff. We're moving into debris removal. As you said, we're going to need to be shoring up the burn scarred areas to prevent mudslides.
I mean, that's possibly the next major event we're going to deal with. They're expecting some precipitation to come in, a completely different kind of weather pattern that we've been experiencing for the last 2 weeks. We think there's not going to be that much rain, but enough rain to be helpful to add moisture and tamper down any, remaining smoldering fires, but it could be more. And generally the areas around the Pacific Palisades, Topanga Canyon, Malibu, we have flash floods there. This with the denuded hillside will only accelerate that. And so there's a huge effort now. We've been focusing on wildfire fighting, but there's also simultaneously a huge effort underway to address the potential for mud flows. And that's a whole different set of resources that are out there. The government cannot do that alone. This is really all hands on deck, and it is public and private. And as I said earlier, whole of community, because we really can't do it all without the partnership of the public as well.
Well, this is great. I'm glad, whether formally or informally, voluntarily or involuntarily, you're involved, Mark. Obviously you and I have worked together on a lot, as we alluded to, but your experience goes way back before that. I know the people of California may not know your name, but they should appreciate all the work that you do and the knowledge you bring to this. And we thank you for coming in at 13th and Park and sharing some of that with us. And hopefully it'll help us get a sense of what's to come.
Happy to be with you today. This is very nice. You're doing well.
We love it.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks, bud.
All right.
Okay.